Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday the 24th of March in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, investors grow hopeful as Donald Trump said to narrow the scope of his plan for reciprocal tariffs.
Rachel Reeves floats changes to the UK's digital services tax in a bid to dodge US levies as she prepares for a high-stakes spring statement.
Plus, Turkey unrest, more market turmoil and protests expected after police arrest Erdogan's main political rival.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
US and European stock futures have risen on signs that Donald Trump's plan for reciprocal tariffs may be more measured than he previously suggested. Sources in the administration have told Bloomberg the levies will still target countries that have tariffs or barriers on US goods, but some nations and blocs will be excluded. It's also understood the US president no longer plans to announce separate sector-specific tariffs at the 2nd of April event dubbed Liberation Day by Trump. Our Markets Live strategist Mark Cranfield says traders remain on edge.
The mood at the moment is a bit better, but there's a very long way to go, and traders are used to whiplash. They've seen before that just because one thing is said, it can be reversed quite quickly, so they'll be monitoring the headlines very much over the next 24, 48 hours. This week is pretty light on US data, so it's really all going to be about the headlines that come out of Washington and how traders respond to that.
Mark Cranfield speaking as Australia's Treasurer Jim Chalmers warned the US administration's policies will have a seismic impact on the global economy. Meanwhile, Chinese Premier Li Qiang says that Beijing is prepared for shocks that exceed expectations.
As reports suggest that the White House is opting for targeted tariffs, the UK's Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has signalled that Britain's tax on big tech companies could be changed as part of any potential deal with the US. Currently, there is a 2% levy on revenue from digital services earned in Britain, paid by the likes of Amazon, Meta and Google. But Reeves says that changes to the tax may form part of a trade negotiation with the US.
We've got to get the balance right, and those discussions at the moment are ongoing. We want to make progress. We do not want to see British exporters subject to higher tariffs, and we want to see trade barriers fall right across the world.
Rachel Reeves speaking to the BBC's Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg show. Ahead of Wednesday's spring statement, the Chancellor also said she plans to reduce the government's operating costs by 15% over the next 5 years, including cutting 10,000 civil service jobs.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney began his election campaign with a warning. America wants to break us. The former Bank of England governor has called a snap vote for the 28th of April, just 2 weeks after he took over from Justin Trudeau. He's been focusing his campaign on standing up to US President Donald Trump.
President Trump claims that Canada isn't a real country. He wants to break us so America can own us. We will not let that happen. We're over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
Before he became leader, Carney's Liberal Party were on course for a total electoral wipeout, but his campaign has seen them gain more than 20 percentage points in aggregated polls.
Turkey has jailed President Erdogan's main political rival on corruption charges. Ekrem İmamoğlu, Istanbul's mayor, was detained by police last Wednesday but only formally arrested on Sunday. He's the most prominent person to be apprehended in a recent wave of detentions and investigations against opposition figures, which have prompted mass protests in major cities. İmamoğlu's detention has caused turmoil on Turkey's financial markets, sparking sell-offs in the lira and equities. The country's capital markets regulator has now banned short selling across all stocks and relaxed share buyback rules to prevent further losses.
Ukrainian and US officials held talks in Saudi Arabia over the weekend as President Trump pushes for a ceasefire. Ukraine's defence minister said the discussion was productive and focused, covering key points including energy. Speaking to Fox News, White House envoy Steve Witkoff outlined broader US ambitions to end the conflict.
There are grievances on both sides, but our job, and at the direction, again, I stress, of the president, our job is to narrow the issues, bring the parties together, and stop the killing. That's the game plan, and that's what we're all there to do. And I think that we're doing a pretty effective job of it, and I think you'll see a lot more progress get announced after Monday.
Steve Witkoff speaking to Fox News Sunday. US and Russian delegates are holding separate talks today. Sources say the White House is aiming for a truce agreement by the 20th of April. European officials are sceptical that a deal can be reached without sacrificing Ukraine's interests.
Ant Group says that it has used Chinese-made semiconductors to develop techniques for training AI models that would cut costs by 20%. The news underscores how companies in the country are trying to use local alternatives to NVIDIA's market-leading chips. Sources have told Bloomberg the Jack Ma-backed firm used Chinese chips to get results similar to those from NVIDIA's H800 processor. While not the most advanced semiconductor on the market, the H800 is still relatively powerful and barred from sale to China.
Those are your top stories. On the markets, we're looking at European stock futures 0.3 higher for Euro Stoxx 50. On Wall Street, S&P E-minis are up by 0.7. Nasdaq futures are 0.8 higher, and the 10-year Treasury yield is up 3 basis points this morning at 4.28%. In Asia, the Hang Seng Tech Index now down 0.6%. The broader Hang Seng is 0.3 lower. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is flat. The euro's trading at 108.31 against the dollar.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you more on how Donald Trump might be scaling back his next raft of tariff announcements. And we'll also look ahead to the big week for the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves, the spring statement, of course. But another story caught our eye today on the art of decision-making, or maybe is it a science? I'm not sure. A science journalist, Helen Pearson, has been writing in Bloomberg's Weekend Edition about how to make better decisions in an age of disinformation. I always need help making better decisions.
But this is the idea that good science is constantly reviewed and updated. Think of the advice during COVID-19 or the many and various studies about the effect of alcohol on your health. But the decisions require us to act with certainty. So we have to act on the information that's available to us now, even if things are uncertain. But how good are we then at changing our minds and then feed into that the disinformation that's so apparent and so it appears prolific these days as well. So Helen's been writing about how some of the most urgent challenges for scientists is actually to build up evidence about why people develop false beliefs and what works when it comes to changing them. So being open and honest is one approach. Think about, for example, the messaging around vaccines, very topical in the US at the moment. To say that we don't know everything yet, but this is what we know for now, is often more helpful when it comes to communicating with people than being overconfident when trying to tackle issues like vaccine hesitancy as well. And then there's the solutions as well, and Helen's been looking at some of those as well. One of the studies that's been ongoing since 2017 is showing that a short course in critical thinking helps school children to identify dodgy health claims as well.
Oh, I think that's an excellent thought. Debating and critical thinking are, always useful. But Helen's piece is a really good one to read.
Well, let's bring you more on our top story now. And Donald Trump's next wave of tariffs planned to be announced next week look like they'll be more targeted than he's previously indicated. That's giving markets some potential relief from fears of an all-out tariff war. Our EMEA News Director Rosalind Matheson joins us now for more. Ros, the promise had been reciprocal tariffs from the 2nd of April. What do we know about that plan now?
Well, it does look, as you say, as if it might be more targeted, so reciprocal but semi-reciprocal. And not necessarily on every country. And for now, according to our reporting, they don't plan those separate sectoral specific tariffs. So we're talking about tariffs on sectors including chips and autos, and those seem to be on hold for now. What we do know from our reporting is that he will have these reciprocal tariffs take effect immediately when they're announced, which is expected on April 2. But again, they may not be on every country. It's unclear which ones they are, but we do know he has singled out certain countries or blocs for his ire of late, and those include allies and adversaries alike. So he has cited the European Union, but also South Korea, and of course India and Canada. And so there is a sense that these will be on a bunch of places, but perhaps slightly narrower narrowing the scope. And certainly for now, the sectoral tariffs seem to be on pause.
Is there any sign, though, that the White House, therefore, is paying attention to the market reaction that the tariff announcements have had so far?
Well, they would say not, and they've said that repeatedly, that they're not paying attention to the market. In fact, they seem to be sending a message they're quite sanguine about the markets. I mean, even the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has said some kind of volatility washout in markets is to be expected, which shows in a way that they're talking about how much they're not looking at markets so much. You have to think that they probably are. And certainly it's something that Donald Trump, given his history as a businessman, paid very close attention to, and as a barometer potentially of US sentiment amongst ordinary Americans. That's really a key thing also. It's not just about investor sentiment. It's about gauging if ordinary Americans feel that he's doing a good job and that he's tackling the things that are important to them, which is economic growth and keeping inflation in check. And so as a barometer of that, it might be something that he is indeed keeping a weather eye on, although they are insisting that it's not driving policy.
Roz, for the rest of the world, can those looking on at what Donald Trump does next be a bit relieved that perhaps things are looking less like an all-out trade war being imminent?
Well, certainly Donald Trump has shown that he can announce something one day and change his mind the next, and he might implement something and then walk it back. And so there is certainly room for negotiation there, and that's something that's got to be apparent to countries around the world. But it's also because he might want to hold those things in reserve. Again, he is above all a businessman who likes to have things in the back pocket to negotiate. If he's holding fire on these sectoral tariffs, and we're talking like, again, autos, chips, lumber, pharmaceutical drugs, and so on, he might be keeping those to see what happens on April 2, what the impact is of those reciprocal tariffs, and whether he needs to go further with sectoral tariffs. And certainly they are going for what they call this dirty 15 countries. That's 15% of the countries they say are the worst in terms of the trading relationship with the US. And he's very much focusing his attention, again, on places like the EU and Canada, but also allies like South Korea and Asia. So there's a lot in the back pocket there for Donald Trump and a lot of negotiating power still to come. But it does show, again, that for countries around the world, there's possibly room to get in his ear and try and get a better deal.
Ros, thank you for being with us. That is Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Roslyn Matheson.
Here in the UK, the Chancellor is signalling that the UK is considering changing its digital services tax on big tech companies as part of efforts to avoid getting hit with tariffs from Donald Trump. This ahead of Rachel Reeves announcing what's expected to be billions of pounds in spending cuts at the spring statement on Wednesday. Our UK politics reporter James Woolcock is with us for more. James, first of all, what do we know about the potential changes to the digital services tax?
Well, so Bloomberg reported on Friday that the Treasury is considering several options for modifying the so-called tech tax. Now, it raises £800 million a year by taxing 2% of the revenue of most major tech companies. And it speaks to everything Ros was just telling you. The UK is looking at the US and going, do we have an angle here? And it's probably going to be tech companies. And so the Chancellor was asked about it 5 times in an interview over the weekend. And she said, to summarise, we're in discussions about a range of measures. Those discussions are ongoing. We don't want to see tariffs on British exporters. But crucially, 5 times, she did not rule this out. And then she told The Sun, the newspaper in the UK, that the government were working to get a deal ahead of April the 2nd, which is that date that reciprocal tariffs are incoming. So we don't know it's not happening, but we know that it might be on the table. So a little bit of advice for you and Stephen Caroline is that when civil servants and ministers say there are no current plans to do something like this, that's them not ruling it out. And Rachel Reeves was at pains to say there are currently no plans to change the tax.
OK. Meanwhile, the Chancellor's also gearing up for the spring statement on Wednesday. I mean, there are many difficulties here. What are we expecting her to announce?
Well, look, the pitch has always been stability. And Reeves has said multiple times, more times than I can count, that tax changes aren't coming in the statement on Wednesday. She ruled it again on Sunday. But we do know, both from sources and from economists just doing the numbers, that the headline growth figure for this year is going to be cut drastically. I mean, press reports all across the pitch say it's going to be somewhere from going from 2% currently to maybe 1% in the OBR's forecast. Now, that's going to have an impact on headroom, the amount the government has to spend. The various economists reported in the press say, at the moment, Reeves has £10 billion. It's likely to be cut to being £4.5 billion short. Now, we've already heard this past week week that there's going to be £6 billion in welfare savings. We also expect Reeves to announce that there's going to be a number of government cutbacks. Over the weekend, she said as much as 15% in the civil service administrative costs. And that's to try and take her back to that £10 billion headroom figure. She wants to try and say that she's restoring the government finances after the high rates, growth shocks and the trade tensions from Donald Trump.
How does all this go down politically, though, within the Labour Party?
Badly, in short. I mean, the welfare bill is an existential problem for Labour MPs. Publicly, they've been saying, Keir Starmer has talked about the weight of the tax falling on the broader shoulders. They then say, is that really people who are taking disability payments? And the word austerity is being thrown around. You then look at ministers. These civil servant cuts are going to affect all of their budgets. What is the point of being a minister if you have less and less resource to affect change? And then finally, look at the polls. Labour have dropped 8 points since the national election last year, and Keir Starmer's personal approval rating has plummeted 22 points. Having said all that, at the moment this is academic. Labour have a majority of 170 seats in Parliament. You would need 170 people to abstain or 85 Labour MPs to actively rebel. The winter fuel payments that had all that discontent last year only reached 52 abstentions. So what this Wednesday is going to be is a sign of the watermark of discontent in Keir Starmer's administration.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.